And you had mentioned President Biden's meeting with Putin this week. What are you looking for to come out of that? One thing they've already announced is that they're going to scrap the idea of a post meeting press conference, which I think is probably reflective of what happened when Donald Trump met with him. But what is the message that you think Biden needs to deliver here, and what should his top priorities in this conversation be?
Well, I think with Russia, we want a stable relationship, but I think we need to have a president that comes back in and says, you cannot mess in our elections. We are aware of what you're trying to do, both in terms of disinformation, misinformation, how even in the 2020 elections, when you used Russian agents and Ukrainian agents, oftentimes manipulating major American political figures, that was inappropriate. We want you to cut it out. We want you to cut out the kind of threatening behavior that you are taking towards Ukraine and indirectly towards some of the Baltic states. I think we need to also have a very strong message on cybersecurity. The direct Russian government hacking, like we saw in the case of SolarWinds. Remember, Karen, SolarWinds was a case where the Russians got into 18,000 companies. Luckily, they only decided to exfiltrate out information, in a sense, classic espionage. But nothing would have stopped them if they'd gotten into those 18,000 companies and instead said, let's go ahead and shut all those companies down the way the cyber criminal group did in terms of the Colonial Pipeline and the meatpacking plant and some of the other areas. They could have brought our economy to a grinding halt. We need to have, one, we need to pass domestic legislation to require when these cyber incidents take place that you report them to the government. We also need some international set of standards so that when we say to the Russians, whether it's coming from the Russian spy services or a group of cyber criminals, if you are attacking critical infrastructure in America, or for that matter in the West, where they shut down the Irish healthcare system a few weeks back, there will be consequences. And we need to have, that's again where it needs to be not just NATO, but the alliance of democracies standing up to Putin on this issue around cyber and ransomware.
Well, so President Biden has said that he has not seen evidence that the Russian government was directly involved in the Colonial Pipeline hacking and the ransomware. Do you buy that?
Well, Karen, the idea that if you have a group of cyber criminals in Russia, they may not be members of the Russian GRU or SVR or FSB, the spy services, but they're operating out of Russia. They are operating with the indirect, at least, acquiescence of the Russian government. And don't think for a moment that the Russian spy services, the Russian government is not watching and learning from the techniques of these cyber criminals. I think we need a regime. I think we need an international set of standards, the same way we have around chemical weapons or nuclear weapons or other activities that say if something is coming from your country, emanating from your country, and it is going about shutting down things like a healthcare system or shutting down critical infrastructure, the levels of what's called attribution, of you taking the blame for that, are going to be such that you're going to have to pay some consequences. We have both cyber offensive capabilities that occasionally we have used. We also have the ability to sanction, but we need to do this, I believe, in concert with our allies. This is not just a U.S. problem in terms of Russia or Chinese cyber activities, whether it be ransomware, hacking of and stealing of intellectual property, stealing of personal information in terms of potential use the way, whether it be SolarWinds or the OPM hack a few years back by the Chinese. This is an area of vulnerability that I've been shouting on this for a long time. I do think the reality of SolarWinds, then combined with the reality of people waiting in gas lines with the Colonial Pipeline, the reality of this challenge, I think, is driven home now. And I think, part of it's incumbent upon us in Congress. We need, and I'll have bipartisan legislation, a mandatory incident reporting legislation. We need to start a debate about whether ransomware should even be allowed to be paid. And candidly, one of the good news stories that came out, and I think it hopefully put a shock across the bow of folks who disproportionately believe in some of the cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, when the United States government was able to go back upstream and take back some of the ransomware from the cyber criminals in Colonial Pipeline. That was a great sign for the good guys in terms of potentially undermining the payment methodology of choice, which has been Bitcoin for a lot of these cyber criminals.
Well, you had talked about the need for an international body to sort of adjudicate these sorts of things. Um, President Biden has indicated he might be open to an idea that Putin has raised, which is essentially that they would turn in their hackers if the United States would reciprocate and do the same. This sort of bilateral effort. Does this make sense to you? Is this a good way to be sort of adjudicating issues like this? Presumably, this is not the last we're going to see.
Cyber criminals are criminals. And if you're violating American law or if you're violating international standards, you ought to be held accountable. So any kind of international cooperation, I'm somewhat suspect whether Vladimir Putin's really going to turn over these cyber criminal gangs. I think a lot of these folks, their day job may be working for the Russian spy services, and their evening moonlighting may be as cyber criminals. But if we can get to some level of collaboration on an international basis on that, let's have at it. I also think what we're going to need, and one of the things I would have liked to have seen a stronger statement come out of the G7 meeting, is we need to recognize, not so much with Russia, but with China. And when I talk about China, I think it's really important to note at least my beef is with the Communist Party of China, not the Chinese people, or obviously not Chinese Americans. But China has a plan to both steal intellectual property and to compete and try to beat America and the West in every major technology area. And we need to have a counter plan on that. Now, last week, this also passed the Senate, didn't get as much attention. We finally put our money where our mouth is, invested $52 billion in trying to promote a domestic chip industry, semiconductor chips, to build 7 to 10 new fabrication facilities here in America. That's critical to our supply chain in all areas. But we're going to need to make similar investments in 5G to counter China's efforts around Huawei. We're going to need to have an alliance amongst democracies as we do technology development with artificial intelligence, quantum computing, in many areas around biotech. China, in area after area, is investing literally hundreds of billions of dollars, combining that with intellectual property theft that amounts to about $500 billion of value every year, combined with a very organized and well-executed plan. And you've got an economic challenge, especially in technology areas, that we've never seen in this country before. And candidly, again, we're going to need to do this, not just America, but with an alliance of democracies. So whether it's cyber, that we need international standards, whether it's around technology development, whether it's around standard setting and rule setting for each of these new technologies. These are all areas where America needs to be back and take the lead.